Good morning, friends, and shalom to you all. Welcome to this episode of The Watchdog, here exclusively on the Synagogue News. I am your host, CJ Cox, and I am here to tell you, my friends, that we are living in biblical times. Want to go ahead and say a brief, belated, for those of you watching this channel, but nonetheless, a brief Happy Reformation Day / Happy Halloween to all of you. I hope that it was incredibly good. Brief little history fact for you guys. Reformation Day is celebrated because 505 years ago, yesterday, that is October 31st, a certain German monk by the name of Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door at Wittenberg and inadvertently caused the Protestant Reformation, which, of course, is got a great deal to do with the fact that excuse me, sorry, I was saying that right. Has got a great deal to do with the fact that we are all currently religiously free and not under the auspices of the Catholic Church. So that's why we in the Protestant community tend to celebrate that. Halloween, for those who do not know, is a nearly 1800-year-old Christian holiday. Yes, I did say Christian, not pagan. Christian holiday, which is actually meant to commemorate the martyrs. So you can kind of think of it like a Memorial Day for, excuse me, my apologies, a Memorial Day for Christians, right? You kind of commemorating those who have actually given their lives for the faith. Not influenced by things like Samhain or Dia de los Muertos. In fact, Dia de los Muertos is actually influenced by Halloween, hence why it's on the same day. But nonetheless, I digress. Just wanted to give you guys a little fun history facts there before we actually get into what we're going to get into today. So for everybody who is here, just want to say first off again, shalom. I see Doki in the live chat, and I appreciate you being here, my friend. If you are here, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Please consider hitting that bell to get notified about every time that we go live. By the way, you can also follow us on various different social media platforms. I am on Facebook, Twitter, Gab, Parler, and Minds. You can find me with the tag The Synagogue on any of those different websites, and I will certainly be not only happy to see you there, but also, give you the old follow back and all that kind of stuff. Excuse me, kind of stuff. Consider sharing this video to any of those websites that you frequent, and also, of course, giving your boy that follow. Also, want to remind you guys, if you want to contribute to us in any sort of financial way, you can certainly do so. There is a Patreon account that we have, the Synagogue, of course. You can certainly give there if you'd like to be one of our monthly subscribers. We don't have tiers, so you can give as much or as little as you like. If you also want to give but don't feel comfortable giving more than once, then you can also give through the PayPal. PayPal, of course, is a service that allows you to give donations of your choice. Once again, don't have any tiers or anything like that. And it'll only be one time at that point. So if you guys do actually find this content to be useful, if you find this to be something that provides a level of clarity in the constant glut that we have here, in nonstop podcasting and people giving their opinions on news, most of that news being fake news, even if it's right or left, doesn't really seem to matter. If you feel like we're providing any clarity in that, please consider contributing there. We do aim on turning this into a full-time career. Doki Doki says, I wonder if Luther dressed up in a costume on that day. That's kind of funny. Actually, so last year, fun fact, when I did on my other channel, Reformation Day open mic, we went like 7 or 8 hours. It was ridiculous. But I actually was in full Martin Luther Catholic monk garb because that's what he would have worn when he was knocking on the door there. But nonetheless, this particular video won't be about that. Shameless plug for my other channel, though. If you guys have not seen the other channel, I do have another channel primarily about religion called The Synagogue, sans the news. And we will be doing at some point, unfortunately, I'm way late, but at some point, we will be doing a series of videos on not only the 3 Jewish holidays that just passed in the Jewish high holidays, but also Halloween and Reformation Day as well, and Thanksgiving now coming up. Hopefully, we'll be getting those a lot, what's the word I'm looking at? Getting these out quicker and more, in the holiday season is basically what I'm trying to say. At any rate, friends, we got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about today, and we got a limited time to talk about it, of course, because we try to keep these particular videos around an hour. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Before we get into our articles, I want to talk briefly about Elon Musk's takeover, quote unquote, of Twitter. For those of you who do not know, it is official. Elon Musk has officially purchased Twitter. He owns it now. It is his. It is no longer Jack Dorsey's. It is no longer whoever else might have owned it besides Jack Dorsey. It is the weird guy who tried to name his child A37 dash whatever it is that he tried to name his child. And there's some positive to Elon Musk being the owner of Twitter, namely that he seems to be at least somewhat of a guardian of free speech. How exactly that will play out long term, of course, is yet to be seen. There is also some negative about it, which is just simply that Elon Musk, in my own personal opinion, is an incredibly weird and creepy dude. And I don't really trust him, considering the kind of stuff that he's actually gotten himself into in the past, right? So, for example, he owns the whole Neuralink thing, which is trying to link people's brains neurologically to the internet, which I find super bizarre, to be honest with you. He's obviously really big on Tesla. Tesla, in and of itself, conceptually as a company, doesn't really have a problem. But it is one of those many companies that, on top of trying to kind of have a little bit of a monopoly on its own market, namely the electric car market, it is also, kind of in bed with a lot of various governments. For example, the United States government, of course, but also the South African government, where he's originally from. Various things like that that have just always kind of weirded me out. I don't really trust Elon Musk. I don't know if we should trust Elon Musk. I think it's dangerous for us to trust Elon Musk. But with that being said, I do at least appreciate the fact that Twitter seems to be, as far as speech is concerned, a freer place today than it was a week ago. So, we take the good with the bad. Obviously, for those of us who are Christians, we believe that everything is in God's hands and he will do with everything as he sees fit. This is his will, and so we're going to be serving him in the day he's made. But I digress on that. I just wanted to briefly mention that he has officially purchased it. I do appreciate free speech increasing on the platform, and I also am kind of skeptical. But with all that being said, I just wanted to get into that very briefly. Also, one other thing, actually, a week from now, November 8th, right now it's November 11th, 2022. A week from today will be election day. Now, I know a lot of people are really skeptical about whether or not they should vote, considering a lot of the stuff that people believe happened in 2020. A lot of people basically think that this is rigged against us as conservatives, and it very well may be. However, I believe it is our civic duty to vote. And I don't mean to sound like the constant commercials that are berating you guys every day on your football games and your basketball games and watching a movie on Hulu. And it seems like everybody on the entire planet is trying to say, vote, go vote now, all this other kind of stuff, right? And a lot of these people are only wanting you to vote because they suspect you'll vote for their side. I get that. However, I do think that it is our civic duty. I would encourage you guys highly to vote. And right here, we're going to wear our biases on our sleeve. I encourage you guys to vote for conservative candidates. If we want to have a conservative nation, obviously it starts in the hearts and minds of individuals, but we do also need to be electing conservative candidates. So I'll speak from my own state. I am personally supporting Ammon Bundy, independent conservative, for governor. I think he's probably the best gubernatorial candidate in the country, to be honest with you. Maybe we'll do a full video on that. I also will be supporting Scott Cleveland for senator over Mike Crapo. He is also a conservative, but also an independent, not affiliated with any political party, which is always nice. I also happen to know Scott Cleveland very lightly, but nonetheless, the restaurant I used to work at used to serve him basically weekly. And so, we got to get to know him a little bit. So that's kind of cool. Allow me to be a part of the elites. I'm just kidding. Anyways, and whoever the better candidates in your area are, whether you are having representative elections, which you definitely are, by the way. By the way, Russ Fulcher, 2022, is another person I'll be supporting this year. Um, Republican, who I think is incredibly conservative, who I think is incredibly trustworthy. But nonetheless, I digress. There's a couple other smaller elections too, Raul Labrador for Attorney General and stuff like that. But the point is just to say, um, I believe we need to be supporting candidates who actually share our values. If we would like our values to be something that is established here in this country, right? And I don't mean that in a tyrannical sense. We are obviously, at least I am, a Burkean traditionalist, a constitutional conservative. In other words, I don't believe that we should be forcing our will on other people, right? But nonetheless, part of not forcing our will on other people is winning these elections so that people who don't want to force their will on other people get elected, right? Um, so I'm gonna make this, quick and end it here. But support your local conservative candidates. Vote. It is your civic duty. It's a right that we don't actually deserve, frankly. In fact, it's not a right in the same way other human rights are, right? Like for the vast majority of human beings in the vast majority of world history, voting has not been a thing. And frankly, there's nothing from any theory of law, whether that be natural law or rights given by divine law or anything like that, that actually says we deserve to vote. We don't deserve to vote. That's not a human right in the same way your right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness is. So since we have it, cherish it and definitely consider it part of your civic duty. But I digress with that. Let's go ahead and acknowledge some people here in the live chat before we jump into our chat. Chris Lucas is here today. Chris Lucas says the Republican primary needs to be treated like the general election. 1000% on board with you, my friend. In this particular Idaho election, we do have the luxury of having independents like Ammon Bundy and Scott Cleveland, who are, on top of being very good, actually surprisingly have a platform. They could potentially win. That's not usually the case with third party candidates. But you're exactly right. If we really want change, we can't just be going mindlessly to the general election and voting R on some dud who doesn't even believe the things that we do, and in fact has more in line with the local Democratic Party. We need to be actively involved in the primaries, actively involved in meetings, actively involved in lower level state politics too. Vote in your city council elections, man. Vote for your local state senator. Uh, vote for your mayor. The county commissioner. All this other kind of stuff. A lot of times people just like, oh, I'm going to vote for the senator and I'm going to vote for the president. And then they just don't pay attention to politics at all. And then they wonder why everything is going out of whack, right? So completely agree with you. Also, thank you for being here. Jamie Russell's here as well. Send me a message at the CJ. That's hilarious. I will definitely do so. The trusty ape is here as well. Appreciate you listening while at work. Who else here? I could have sworn I saw somebody else here. Maybe not. Anyways, I appreciate every single one of you guys. Let's get right into the conversation we have today. We're going to start with some Pope Francis stuff, which is not obviously our headliner, but nonetheless, we are going to start with some Pope Francis stuff because, of course, Pope Francis is doing things that we think he shouldn't be doing, but which he's obviously going to do because, well, he's Pope Francis. He's the most Jesuitical Jesuit out there, really. And I don't say that in a conspiratorial way. A lot of people I think of, the Jesuits as kind of like the Illuminati, and that is not really accurate. But a proper understanding of the Jesuits will definitely let you know their sole purpose is counter Reformation. They are a military style organization. What does that mean? It means that their whole hierarchy is set up in the same way that the military is. They are very highly influenced by things like liberation theology and stuff like that. And for a long time, a lot of the Catholic Church actually did not want a Jesuit to be leading them. And now, of course, they are. And Pope Francis himself has been not only the first Jesuit Pope, but has also been incredibly active in politics. Has been incredibly active in the North Korea, South Korea thing. He's been incredibly active in the Israel Palestine thing. He's been incredibly active in the Armenia Azerbaijan thing. He's been incredibly active at the United Nations, even calling the Paris Paris Climate Conference of 2015. It was really set up by him. He's been very big on uniting all the different world religions, such as in March 5th, 2021, when he called together all the different Abrahamic faiths to have a collective prayer with each other at the Ziggurat Ur. And all this stuff for people who think this sounds a little bit too much like a conspiracy theory. First off, watch Watchdogs of the Past. We've documented it. Second off, um, we on this channel go out of our way to use sources that we know don't agree with us in ideology. And the reason for that is you guys need to know this isn't some, Alex Jones kind of, even though I think Alex Jones is actually right about a lot more stuff than he gets credit for. But nonetheless, this isn't some, Alex Jones, they're turning the freaking frogs gay kind of channel. We are documenting this with firsthand sources. We use stuff like Vatican News, the official newspaper of the Vatican. We use stuff like Ecumenoi, if I was saying that right, which is the official newspaper of the World Council of Churches. We use things like America, which is the #1 Jesuit newspaper in the United States of America, and so on and so forth. This is not conspiracy. This is all very much fact, right? And the first thing that we're going to talk about today, which is very much fact, is that Pope Francis has appointed a pro-abortion economist to the Pontifical, Academy for Life. And we're going to actually have this next section where we talk about 3 different things, just generally labeled Pope Francis news. So here's our first portion for you, Pope Francis news. And we will have a couple different articles that we're going to pop up here as well. Let's go ahead and share the articles here. If you guys have any questions for me, by the way, I forgot to mention this part. If you have any questions for me, tag me at the Synagogue News, and I will answer any questions at the end of the program. I'm going to try and avoid the live chat just so I don't get distracted or anything like that. But nonetheless, if you guys do have questions you want answered, please do consider, tagging me there as well. Well, real quick, but since we haven't got in, I will at least answer this question. Is it true the Pope's brother became an STA? I've never heard that. I also don't know if Jorge Mario Bergoglio, which is the real name of Pope Francis, actually has brothers, to be honest. At least not living ones. But anyways, let's get right into the article here today. This is from Catholic News Agency, so that's the article we're reading from today. And it says Pope Francis appoints pro-abortion economist to the Pontifical Academy for Life. Now, for those of you who aren't Catholic, this is important for a couple of reasons. The first and most important reason being this is, in the eyes of the world, the largest Christian church on the planet. Now, for those of us who are Protestants, you probably cringe at me calling it the largest Christian church, because anybody who knows anything about religion will know that Protestantism and Christianity, Protestantism, which I would consider Christianity, and Catholicism are easily as divergent as Protestantism and Mormonism are, easily as divergent as Protestantism and Orthodox Judaism are, easily as divergent as Protestantism and Islam are. But nonetheless, that isn't how the world sees it. And the reason that that's particularly important is because when we see these unions of religions, right, people meeting at the World Council of Churches, people meeting for that Abrahamic prayer at all these different kinds of things, the Pope kind of takes the position of quote unquote leader of Christians whenever these kinds of things happen, right? And he's really been also the driving force behind the unification of these different religions. A big part of how Pope Francis is accomplishing that is liberalizing the Catholic Church, making them softer on LGBT issues, making them softer on the issue of abortion, making them softer on the issue of Christ is the only way to proper salvation. And this is just falling right in line with that. So that's why we're actually talking about this, for those who may not be Catholic and may be wondering, okay, CJ's not Catholic. What's the point of us even being informed about this kind of stuff? So again, this is from Catholic News Agency. Pope Francis appoints pro-abortion economist to Pontifical Academy for Life. Pontifical Academy for Life is meant to be a pro-life organization, for lack of a better term. I don't know if organization really works, because of course it's part of the greater organization of the Catholic Church, but I digress. Let's get right into the article here today. One of the above, also want to credit the original writer, Zelda Caldwell. Yes, her real name is Zelda. I did not make that up. One of the newest members of the Pontifical Academy for Life, appointed by Pope Francis, is an outspoken advocate of abortion rights, having recently shared her opposition to the overturning of Roe v. Wade via Twitter. An Italian-American economist named Mariana Mazzucato, known for her work promoting the public's sector role in encouraging innovation, was among 7 academics appointed by the Pope on October the 15th to serve 5-year terms with the Academy. In his 2020 book, Let Us Dream, The Path to a Better Future, Pope Francis described Mazzucato's work as, quote, thinking that is not ideological, which moves beyond the polarization of free market capitalism and state socialism, and which has at its heart a concern that all of humanity has access to land, lodging, and labor, end quote. Immediate pause here. Number one, people should have seen this coming, considering the fact that 2 years ago, he was already praising this woman. And by the way, we were talking about this 2 years ago when he was already praising this woman, right? Um, it's kind of been an open secret for some time that Pope Francis is not only far more liberal than his predecessors, but is also somewhat of a flip flopper, right? He'll say to the traditional Catholics, hey, no, I'm for life. I think there is nothing more sacred than life. I think there is no place that should be more safe for the baby than the womb of the mother, all this other kind of stuff. He'll say all the platitudes, right? But then he'll turn around and do stuff like not only appointing Mazzucato, but also praising her in his 2020 book. He once had a transgender activist write the foreword for one of his books, something like 3 or 4 years ago. I can't remember exactly how long it was. But nonetheless, not that long ago. He's always been consistently inconsistent. You know what I mean? And this is just another perfect example of that. So, for those of us who have been kind of paying attention to the trajectory of the Pope Francis pontificate, this is no surprise. This is just the way that it's always been, right? The other thing, though, is if we look kind of between the lines here, we can see that this is partially not just the push to social liberalization, but economic liberalization within the Catholic Church as well. Pope Francis is a socialist. He would probably not wear the label socialist on his sleeve, but he's been highly influenced by what is known as liberation theology, which we'll probably do a full video on at some point. And he has been quite clear about some of his more socialistic policies, saying that we need to move forward with a new economy and stuff like that. He is also, by the way, fun fact, one of the financial backers and ideological backers of the Great Reset. But notice here, he says, her thinking is not ideological. It moves beyond the polarization of free market capitalism and state socialism, which is not something that's possible to do, by the way. Socialism and capitalism are not compatible. They're opposites, right? It's like left and right. There is no middle ground between left and right. If you're in the middle, you're neither left or right. If you're on the right, you're not left. If you're on the left, you're not right. And I'm talking about just your hands here. I'm not talking about politically. And notice here he continues on to say, which has at its heart a concern that all humanity have access to land, lodging, and labor. Now, we, being conservatives, do agree that humanity, all humanity, every human should have access to land, lodging, and labor. The thing is we think that that should be done in a free society where people own their own land, where people have a right to control their own labor, and not we don't believe that this is somehow something the state should be providing. Pope Francis does not believe that. Pope Francis believes that it is incumbent upon the state to actually provide you with land, provide you with labor, and even provide you with things like a guaranteed basic income, food and water, and all that kind of stuff. I guess water, technically, it is the state's job in a way, because pipelines and all that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, you guys get the idea. And those of us who are familiar with American politics will already know when we hear things like all humanity have access to land, logic, and labor, those are kind of dog whistles. They're kind of, buzzwords there, kind of hinting there to all of the, Roman Catholic socialists. Hey, I'm kind of on your side. I'm not really on the side of, those who would be considered a little bit more conservative than me. But nonetheless, I digress on that. The website Catholic Culture, published on Tuesday, links to recent social media posts shared by Mazzucato, in which she tweeted and retweeted pro-abortion statements concerning the Supreme Court's decision to return abortion laws to the states, which again, for those who don't know, is actually all that the overturning of Roe v. Wade did. Abortion is not illegal in the United States. Abortion can be illegal in your individual state if your lawmakers decide to do as much. That's what the overturning of Roe v. Wade actually does. It does not illegalize abortion. It simply makes it an option for individual states to illegalize abortion. Now, I personally do think abortion should be illegal, and I absolutely will be supporting abolitionist politicians here in the state of Idaho. But just for the record, just so we know what is and is not the case, Roe v. Wade's overturn did not make abortion illegal. And I actually have said before, and I'll say again, for those of us who are abolitionists, for those of us who are pro-life, Roe v. Wade's overturn was not the victory in the war. It was the thing that allowed the war to finally commence, right? The fighting started when Roe v. Wade was overturned. It did not end when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Roe v. Wade's overturn simply allowed the fighting to commence, and hopefully we can get 50 individual abortion bans, with, of course, exceptions for the mother's life. I understand that, but no conservative on the planet is trying to say that we need to kill both of them or anything like that, right? Any doctor knows if you have a choice between saving one life and 0 lives, you choose one, but I digress. I should probably come up with something else to say besides I digress. I need to sell shirts that say I digress because I say that like once every 5 minutes. But at any rate, that's what Roe v. Wade actually does. So let's just get that out of the way really quick. In response to a Twitter post that featured commentary deploring the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Mazzucato tweeted, "So good." In other words, she was saying "so good" to the deploring of the overturn of Roe v. Wade, not saying "so good" to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Now, who was doing the deploring? Oh, well, none other than Anna Kasparian, of course, a famous member of the Young Turks, which, on top of being blatantly socialist, and admittedly so, they would wear the name socialist on their sleeves. But on top of being blatantly socialist, they are also kind of terrible people. Alex Jones recently got forced to pay $1 billion, which I hope he does not pay. I hope he wins his appeal. But anyways, $1 billion for saying he thought Sandy Hook was a hoax. Cenk Uygur, head of the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian's boss, has said the Armenian genocide didn't happen. So if Alex Jones saying that the 20 deaths of young children, which of course is incredibly tragic, did not happen, if that's worthy of paying $1 billion, how about the death of 1.5 million Armenian Christians? Because Cenk Uygur denies that that ever occurred. Anyways, Anna Kasparian is the person who is in this video. The post included a video of commentator Anna Kasparian condemning Christians for pushing their own views on non-Christians. Quote, "These comments might be strong, but it's how I genuinely feel. I don't care that you're a Christian. I don't care what the Bible says. Like, I feel like it's a clown show, like sitting here trying to decipher what your little mythical book has to say about these very real political issues," right? End quote, Kasparian said. And of course, Kasparian is not a Christian. She wants to force her atheistic values on us, which is kind of funny. If we don't want children to be murdered in the womb, that's us forcing our values on them. But if they want to murder 1 million babies in the womb without consequence, that's not them forcing their values on us, which of course makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. By the way, I would just like to point out that my belief that Anna Kasparian deserves not to be raped in a free society is a value that I force on people who might want to be sexual predators. And by her logic, I should not be forcing my Christian values on other people. Now, of course, I'm being facetious here. I don't care what she says. I still think we should have rape laws. But the point still stands, right? People like to say stuff, really stupid stuff, if I could be perfectly frank with you, like we don't legislate morality. Yeah, we kind of do. That's why you can't murder people or steal their stuff or rape their daughters or go and, kidnap little children or any of these other detestable, deplorable things that we say you can't do in this country and in the individual states here. It's legislating morality. It's just kind of the way of the world. I would wager to say that virtually every law is legislating morality in some way, shape, or form, and is pushing your values on somebody who would really not like to follow them. That's just kind of the way that laws work. And by the way, every law is done at the point of the gun as well. And what I mean by that is if you try not to follow it, if the state's serious about enforcing it, eventually that'll end with a gun. It's just the way it is. It's always been the way it is. Ain't nothing you can do about it. Shocking and scandalous, the article continues. Because we're not actually talking about Kasparian, we're talking about Mezzicato. Robert P. George, professor of the jurisprudence at Princeton University, professor of jurisprudence, at Princeton University, a Catholic and outspoken advocate for the right to life, told CNA that he is disturbed by the news of the appointment. Quote, the Pontifical Academy for Life exists to advance the Church's mission to foster respect for the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family, beginning with the precious child in the womb. Either one believes in this mission or one does not. It does not, then, if one does not, then, why would one wish to be a part of the Pontifical Academy, end quote, George asked. And in my opinion, the answer is perfectly simple. It's because people like Pope Francis want to change the fundamental nature of the Pontifical Academy of Life to not be something that is fighting for pro-life policies, but rather to be sort of a vehicle for pushing forward whatever the Pope's current agenda is. If the Pope happens to be pro-life, then it'd be pro-life. If the Pope happens to be much more like Francis, then it would be much more like Francis. And again, liberalization of the Catholic Church is crucial to making the Catholic Church more palatable to all the different people he's trying to unite in this sort of global religious scheme, right? You can't have a meeting with the World Council of Churches unless you're willing to compromise on a bunch of stuff that the Protestants and Orthodox within the World Council of Churches say, and you don't, right? You're not going to be able to call together a prayer under the name of Father Abraham at unless you're willing to concede certain things that they believe that you don't believe, right? It's just kind of the way it is. And this is one of the big reasons why a lot of Christians, myself included, are so against things like ecumenism, which is when all the different Christian denominations get together. It's because if we're going to have alliance with each other, then we need to compromise on certain things. And these are things that I don't think we should be compromising on, right? We shouldn't compromise on papal authority. The fact is, the Pope has no authority over Christians. We shouldn't compromise on, things like the divinity of Christ. That's a fundamental part of the gospel. We shouldn't compromise on things like sola fide. That's a fundamental part of the gospel. We shouldn't compromise on whether or not Jesus is the only way. That's a fundamental part of the gospel. But in order to be allied in the religious sense with Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics, Mormons, Muslims, Orthodox Jews, etc., you need to kind of compromise on some of those things that they don't believe. Now, of course, they're going to need to compromise too. And if I was on their side of this, I would be just as indignant. But nonetheless, it's all part and parcel of the plan, right? Get a drink of my coffee here real quick. And why would someone with a quote, and why would someone with appointment authority appoint someone to the academy? I can think of no explanation that is not shocking and scandalous, end quote, George told CNA. Completely agree with George. Catholic culture shared Mazzicato's other tweets and retweets from that time period. One from Robert Reich, who is a famous millionaire who gets mad at billionaires for being too rich. Quote, so states can decide you must carry a fetus, but not whether you can carry a concealed gun, end quote. The answer is, yeah, that's exactly correct. The reason for that is because carrying a gun doesn't actually harm anybody. Only using that gun to harm somebody harms somebody. Kind of obvious, I know, but unfortunately for liberals, it isn't. Also, the Second Amendment of the Constitution protects your right to have a firearm. It does not protect your right to murder your baby in the womb. Oh, by the way, third thing, murdering your baby in the womb is wrong. And I love the logic of the pro-aborts when they'll sit here and say stuff like, oh, the state can force you to carry a child. Right. The state can also force you to feed your 4-year-old. Did you know that? Well, it can. The state can actually force you to take care of your 4-year-old child by giving them a loving environment, by not neglecting their basic needs such as food and water and sleep and so on. by not beating them up, things like that. The state can actually force you to do that. Fun fact. No problem there, but we have a problem if the state, quote unquote, forces you to carry a child that you willingly brought into the world, by the way. Fun fact about sex, it makes babies. That's literally the point of it. Not saying that anybody can't have sex for their own, like recreation, so to speak. Although, even then, within the confines of a marriage, there's nothing wrong with anybody having sex for fun, but have sex with your wife for fun, or husband if you are a woman, right? Um, but husbands and wives who are having sex for fun, just know that the literal purpose of sex is to make children. So you might say, hey, we weren't planning on having a child. Yeah, well, you were having sex. So kind of were planning on having a child, whether you knew it or not. Consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, period, and end of the conversation. June 24th, she retweeted a tweet by Nicholas Sturgeon. Quote, one of the darkest days for women's rights in my lifetime. Obviously, the immediate consequences will be suffered by women in the U.S., but this will embolden anti-abortion and anti-women forces in other countries too. Solidarity doesn't feel enough right now, but it is necessary, end quote. Now, of course, hilarious that in order to be pro-woman, you have to be pro-murdering babies. It's almost like imagine if I said, if you don't support slavery, you're not pro-black person. How ridiculous would that be? Obviously, it'd be completely absurd, but that's kind of the same logic that we have here. And they continue on with a bunch of the tweets, right? We don't want to read all of it because it's not really necessary. The point is, she is somebody who supports the pro-abortion movement. Pro-life pledge removed. The Pontifical Academy for Life was formed by St. John Paul II in 1994 with a pro-life mission to, quote, study information and formation on the principal problems of biomedicine and of law relative to the promotion and defense of life, above all, the direct relation that they have with Christian morality and the directives of the Church's magisterium, end quote. The Academy's first president, Venerable Jerome, probably going to say this wrong, but sorry, Lejeune, I believe, not sure, anyways, established bylaws requiring members of the Academy to sign a declaration stating, quote, before God and men, we bear witness that for us every human being is a person, and that from the moment the embryo is formed until death, it is the same human being which grows to maturity and dies, end quote. In 2016, however, with the appointment of Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia as president of the Pontifical Academy for Life, Pope Francis approved new statutes that eliminated the requirement that members declare themselves pro-life. So again, this is one of those things that if you've been paying attention is kind of just par for the course. We've all seen this coming if we've actually been paying attention to the trajectory of not only the Catholic Church, but also of the Pope Francis pontificate. You need to compromise on these issues if you want to have the global unity that Pope Francis wishes to establish. It's just the way that it is. And so when we see 6 years ago that he is removing the requirement to be pro-life from the Pontifical Academy for Life, for appointees, or we see 2 years ago that he's praising Mazzucato and praising her socialistic ideals, it should come as no shock to us that in 2022, he appoints her to the Pontifical Academy for Life. It isn't shocking. This is entirely in character with Pope Francis. It's on brand for him, as the kids would say. It's me, I'm the kids. Anyways, however, the Academy's new statutes still require members to conform with church teaching, which can change at a whim depending on what the Pope wants. If you don't believe me, just look at the history of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It is not the same now as it was 100 years ago. Certainly not the same now as it was. Well, I don't know if there actually was a functioning catechism 1,000 years ago, but nonetheless, what would operate as sort of a de facto catechism 1,000 years ago. The statute also says members are academicians. I've never seen that word before. Academicians? Academicians? I don't know. Anyways, academics is the point. I just learned a new word. Thank you, article. Appointed by the Pope, can be of any religion. Notice they can be of any religion. So This goes to that whole unity of religions thing that we're talking about, that Pope Francis seeks to establish. Though they should, quote, promote and defend the principles regarding the value of life and dignity of the human person, interpreted in a way that conforms to the magisterium of the church, end quote. That church, of course, being the Catholic Church. An academician can have his or her membership revoked, the statutes say, quote, in the case of public and deliberate action or statement manifestly contrary to said principles or seriously offensive to the dignity and credibility of the Catholic Church and the Academy itself, end quote. However, in 2017, a pro-abortion theologian, Nigel Bigger, by the way, in case anybody wants to take my words out of context, and also it's out of context, out of contents, that's hilarious, was appointed to the Academy, Nigel Bigger. An Anglican professor of moral and pastoral theology at the University of Oxford, he supported legalized abortion up to 18 weeks and has expressed qualified support for euthanasia, the National Catholic Register reported. So obviously, being in line with what the Catholic Church teaches can, like I said, change on a whim depending on what the Pope believes and what he therefore declares in the catechisms. In 2021, in an address to the Pontifical Academy for Life, Pope Francis affirmed the Academy's pro-life mission, because he's consistently inconsistent, as I said. The Holy Father said that the institutions propose, that what the institutions purpose, actually, you know what? I was reading that wrong anyway. The Holy Father said that the institution's purpose, not what the institution's purpose. My apologies, I can read, I promise. Was to help today's men and women rediscover the primacy of the right to life from conception to its natural end, end quote. And again, this goes back to what we were talking about him being consistently inconsistent, right? Pope Francis will say, hey, no, this is all about the primacy of life. And then he'll appoint Mezzicato and appoint Nigel Bigger and so on and so forth, and remove the necessity to actually be pro-life, from the qualifications here and all this other kind of stuff, right? It's all just a bunch of inconsistent nonsense, and kind of reminds me of a Bible verse that says, the devil is the father of confusion. Not that I'm calling Pope Francis the devil, but if the pointy hat fits. At any rate, let's go ahead and get to our next Pope Francis themed article. We're already 43 minutes in, so this is going to be a long episode, friends. I appreciate all of you guys who are still here, because we still have to talk about the headliner, of course, which is that there is now, for the first time in British history, a pagan prime minister in Britain. And I mean, obviously, some of us might consider Catholics to be pagans, but nonetheless, I mean, blatantly pagan, Hindu, that kind of thing. But nonetheless, we still have more Pope Francis news to be talking about. Oh my goodness, excuse me. So let's go ahead and do that here real quick. This article here is from Axios. Jacob Crutzen is Jacob Knutson, excuse me, I misread that, is the writer of this article. Pope Francis calls for reforms to the United Nations in his new book. Again, Pope Francis calls for reforms to the United Nations in his new books. Now, brief context for you guys. The General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, General Secretary of the United Nations, who is himself a Jesuit Catholic, by the way, and also a socialist, so very much in line with Pope Francis and his agenda, recently said that he believes that, and recently, I mean last year, recently said that he believes we should have a United Nations 2.0, quote, with teeth. What he means by with teeth is with the ability to enforce what it is that they demand, right? So for those of you who don't know, right now, the United Nations really can't enforce much of anything. First off, there's permanent members on the Security Council. These permanent members on the Security Council can veto any bill, and I mean literally can veto any bill. So you can have, there's 196 member nations in the United Nations. You could have 195 of them agree on something, but one of those 5 on the Security Council reject it, and the bill is torpedoed because they just have that right. And there's no way to actually counteract that on the part of the majority there, even if they have the other four members of the Permanent Security Council on their side. On top of that, even if you get something unanimous, really all that does is just provide a little bit of symbolic authority behind whatever it is that you're trying to say. But in reality, the United Nations doesn't actually have the ability to enforce any of their dictates on smaller nations, which of course is a good thing. Antonio Gutierrez was incredibly disheartened at that. Antonio Gutierrez, by the way, Portuguese politician, socialist, who's been the leader there since 2017 of the United Nations. And he was disheartened by that. He was talking about climate change in particular, and he said he wanted to see a United Nations 2.0 with teeth, which, in the context of what he was saying, was with the ability to enforce their dictates on other nations. Now, of course, that would mean many, many different things if it ended up going forward. That would mean enforcing some level of not net neutrality, excuse me, carbon neutrality. That would be enforcing a anti-gun bill, because the United Nations has very often come out against the United States's, Second Amendment and our liberal use of gun rights, which of course I completely support. That would mean forcing Israel to relinquish control over Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem, and so many other things that would end up indicating, considering if you look at what the United Nations has put forward in the past, all those things would officially start to become enforced. So that's some context here to Pope Francis calling for reforms of the United Nations just a year after his ideological brother in arms, who happens to be the leader of the United Nations, said that we need to see a United Nations with teeth, which again means with the ability to enforce their dictates. So let's get into this. Pope Francis is urging for reforms to the United Nations, specifically to the UN Security Council, in an upcoming book, saying the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine have exposed its limitations, according to AFP. I want to be very clear here. I do not support Russia and their invasion of Ukraine. However, the idea of a legal invasion is kind of hilarious, right? First off, I don't believe in the legitimacy of international law at all. International law, in my opinion, is a little bit of a oxymoron. Laws are established by nations, not international bodies. But on top of that, what is it that makes our invasion of Iraq, which was illegal by constitutional standards, but apparently legal by the United Nations standards, okay, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, not okay? Well, it just happens to be the opinions of the people in the United Nations Security Council. That's what makes it illegal. And again, I don't support Russia in any way, shape, or form. I think that Putin is a dictator and kind of an evil dude. I just think it's kind of funny to start talking about legal and illegal invasions. That's for individual nations, of course, to decide with their own declarations of war and however they've actually set that up. Anyways, why it matters. In the book, Francis criticizes the UN as no longer fit for new realities and denounces war and the possession of nuclear weapons as immoral, saying it's unconscionable that states continue to produce such weapons. What they're saying. The Italian newspaper La Stampa on Sunday published an excerpt of Francis's new book titled I Ask You in the Name of God, 10 Prayers for a Future Hope. Here are those quotes. To the explicit rejection of my predecessors, the events of the first 2 decades of this century compel me to add unambiguously that there is no occasion in which a war can be considered just, end quote. Part of the excerpt reads according to Vatican News. Of course, that's just flagrantly false. Notice he said the first 2 decades of the century, so he talks about World War I, excuse me. But nonetheless, obviously, there is perfectly justified wars that happen all the time. And let's be clear here: war is evil. War is an evil, detestable, no good, very bad sort of thing, right? Even Robert E. Lee, famous general, once said, "It is good war is so terrible, lest we should grow too fond of it." It's very clear, and it's even biblically clear, that war is a terrible thing. However, can war be justified? Of course, war can be justified. That's not even a question. In fact, if you're asking that question, you're asking a stupid question, and your teacher lied to you when she told you there was no such thing as stupid questions. Okay, um, it was justified for us to go to war with Japan after they bombed Pearl Harbor. It was justified for us to go to war with Al Qaeda after they threw planes into our buildings. Now, obviously, there's some theories as to whether or not that even occurred and all that, and I don't want to get into that right now. But just assuming the status quo for a second, that's justified, right? It's justified for us to revolt against the British government for taxing us without actually giving us any representation. It is justified for us to defend ourselves against the British in the War of 1812. It was justified for the state of Israel to have a revolution of their own in 1948. There is plenty of justified wars, right? There is absolutely, positively, beyond no shadow of a doubt, excuse me, that wars can be justified. And the idea that wars can't be justified is frankly absurd. It is absurd. In fact, Pope Francis claims to be a minister of the gospel. I wonder if he thinks that the conquest of Canaan was justified, considering, I don't know, God literally commanded it. But I digress on that. Notice also he says, to the explicit rejection of my predecessors. What's one of the constant things that we say to Catholics about popes? Your laws are arbitrary. You think you stand on tradition. You think you stand on the history that the Catholic Church provides. But in reality, whatever it is that the Pope demands is the current Catholic teaching. And he can outright reject everything his predecessors said. And of course, in the future, people can outright reject what he has said. You have no actual standard save the opinions of the current pontiff who leads you. And this is precisely the problem with the Francis pontificate. It exposes just how ridiculous the Catholic system is. We recently had a YouTube apologist who heartbreakingly converted to Catholicism, S.J. Thomason, right? And one of the reasons she gave for converting to Catholicism is there's so many different issues that Christians disagree on. And she said, I want to stand on the historical Catholic Church where we have the Pope to be an arbiter for us. And of course, the immediate problem with that is this Pope disagrees with the last Pope who disagrees with the Pope before, and so on and so forth. Pope Urban II and Pope Paul, whatever his name was in the 70s, I don't remember his regnal number, and Pope Benedict XVI, the emeritus, and Pope Francis currently, they disagree with each other on so many different fundamental issues, it's not even funny. This is just a perfect example of them. He even says, to the explicit rejection of my predecessors. Now, of course, people will, well, he's not speaking ex cathedra and all that other stuff. And I don't want to get into that per se, because that's obviously a topic for the other channel. But suffice it to say, as an individual Catholic, it doesn't really matter if he's speaking ex cathedra or not, because you as an individual Catholic are meant to submit to whatever it is that he has declared. He's obviously supposed to be the leader, the great shepherd, right? Which is blasphemous in and of itself. Anyways, next quote. There is never a place for the barbarism of war, especially not when contention acquires one of the most unjust faces, the so-called preventative wars, end quote, which again is completely absurd. If you know somebody is going to attack you, it is justified to attack them first, right? Now, I think a lot of people do use preemptive strikes abusively, right? I don't think it was a good thing for us to invade Iraq. Iraq is actually how you pronounce that. My apologies. I am an American. We have American accent, right? But nonetheless, the invasion of Iraq was absolutely absurd. It was immoral. It was illegal by constitutional standards, as it was not a declared war. It was a violation of just war theory. And the reason that was given was that, Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and we were going to go through with a preemptive strike to make sure he didn't attack us or Israel. Now, of course, it turned out he wasn't actually planning on attacking us or Israel. It also turned out he didn't actually have weapons of mass destruction. So my point there is just to say people have used preemptive strikes, preventative wars, as Pope Francis puts it, in an abusive manner. There's no doubt about that. But there has also been times when it's used in a perfectly reasonable and just manner, right? I think a clear example of this would be if we had, and we did, by the way, this is not really open for dispute, unfortunately. If we had knowledge that Japan was going to bomb Pearl Harbor before they did, we would have been perfectly justified in taking out their aircraft carriers first. FDR did not, because, at least this is the running theory, because he believed that the American people would be more willing to go to war if we had been attacked first, rather than us going on some sort of a preventative attack. And of course, in the process, 3,000 American lives were lost. But nonetheless, once again, completely absurd. Next quote. We must all work together to pave the way for a common hope. We all can and must take part in the social process of peace building. That is kind of a dog whistle for having a unified body, a unified global body like the United Nations. Excuse me. Next portion here, he says he urges the Security Council to become, quote, more agile and effective ways of resolving conflicts. That was written ridiculously. You guys need an editor. And for the UN in general to implement organic reforms that will help it in serving the human family, according to AFP. Now, notice here, he says more agile and effective ways of resolving conflicts. Again, this is kind of a dog whistle. This is kind of secret talk here. Recall what Gutierrez had said in the past about wanting a United Nations with teeth. What Francis is saying in saying we want more effective ways of resolving conflicts, and what Gutierrez is saying in saying we want to have a UN with teeth, they're both saying the exact same thing, which is we want a United Nations that has the ability to enforce its dictates. That's what these guys are talking about. Continue reading. The big picture. In August, the Vatican for the first time explicitly said Russia was the instigator of the war with Ukraine. Since then, Francis has gone on to say it can be morally acceptable for states to supply weapons to Ukraine to defend itself in the invasion, according to the New York Times, which, of course, is in flagrant contradiction with what he had just said about never having any justified wars. In his UN General Assembly speech in September, President Biden said the U.S. supports reforms to the Security Council, including adding permanent and non-permanent seats on the council for countries in Africa and Latin America. And then there's the end of the article there. So what's the point? The point is what Antonio Gutierrez has been saying about wanting a UN with teeth. The Pope Francis, is now putting some kind of religious authority behind. And of course, when Pope Francis passes, if he ends up passing before anything happens here, when Pope Francis passes, he has established 73% of the voting Catholic cardinals. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. 73% of the voting Catholic cardinals he has established. That's what I meant to say. He has. He's the one who's actually put them in their, in power there. Which means the guy who's elected next is going to be just as bad, if not worse, as Pope Francis. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and continue forward. We got one more Francis article, then we'll get to our headliner, and then we'll be out of here. So, last Francis article. This is from Vatican News, which is the official state-run newspaper of the Vatican City, and therefore the official newspaper of the Catholic Church. By the way, before we get into this article, I just want to remind you guys, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. Follow us on various social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Parler, Twitter, Gab, Minds, excuse me. You can just find me at The Synagogue. You'll be able to find me anywhere there. Also, if you think that this is good content, if you are appreciating the work that we're putting into this, please do consider contributing to us financially to help me turn this into a full-time career. You can do so either by giving to the Patreon, which is, of course, a subscription-based service, so you'll be giving as much or as little as you like every month, or give a one-time donation to the PayPal, Anything that you do to contribute is, of course, greatly appreciated. And more so than that, the sentiment behind it, namely that you think this is good enough content to actually be considered, you know, career worthy for me, is also greatly appreciated. Nonetheless, back to the article. This is from Vatican News. Pope calls for transformation of economy for the global good. Some more context for you guys. Many of you are aware of the World Economic Forum and their desire to push forward a great reset. What you may not be aware of is that Pope Francis is one of the backers of the World Economic Forum and of the Great Reset. You can actually just go to the World Economic Forum website to demonstrate this, and perhaps we'll actually do that for you guys here on our next episode on Thursday. But nonetheless, Pope calls for transformation of economy for the common good. Pope Francis meets with a group of entrepreneurs from Spain and highlights the importance of transforming the global economy so that everyone can benefit from it, especially the poor and marginalized. This is by Francesca Merlo, and again, this is the official state-run newspaper of the Catholic Church. Addressing a group of entrepreneurs from Spain in the Vatican's consistory hall, Pope Francis welcomed and greeted them, describing their presence as a sign of hope. During the audience with the Confederación Española, I'm totally going to say this wrong, I apologize, Confederación Española de Asociaciones de Jóvenes Empresarios, probably said that wrong, and the Confederation de Empresarios de Galicias, he noted that we are living in an era with, quote, well-known economic and social imbalances, end quote. Kind of sounds like our local Democratic Party, doesn't it? Adding that there is an urgent need to propose an adequate economy to help solve the major problems we're experiencing worldwide. The quote-unquote Holy Father, absolutely blasphemous that they call him that, went on to express 3 ideas he considered relevant for the journey as entrepreneurs. Number 1, be prophets. I'm not kidding. That's actually what the article says. You can see it on your screen. The first consideration he offered was prophecy. Pope Francis explains that in the Bible, quote, the prophet is one who speaks on behalf of God, who conveys his message through which they bring about change in the context in which they live, end quote. In today's complex context, characterized by war and the environmental crisis, Pope Francis noted that, quote, it is up to you to develop your service, let us say, as prophets who proclaim and build the common home, respecting all forms of life, caring for the good of all, and promoting peace. Without prophecy, the economy and all human action in general is blind, end quote. Again, not making it up. This is the official state-run newspaper of the Vatican. Pope Francis is saying that you very rich millionaires and billionaires need to be prophets. And by being prophets, you need to basically be, how would you say this? Moving forward, what you're doing being prophets is moving forward this agenda, right? Of this agenda of, lost my train of thought here. Agenda of, moving socialism through the country and all that kind of stuff, through the countries, I should say. Number 2, work on your spiritual health. The second idea, Pope Francis continued, relates to caring for one another's relationship with God. He explained that, quote, just as the earth, when it's well cultivated and cared for, this relationship bears abundant fruit. In this way, when we cultivate spiritual health and when we have a well cared for relationship, with the Lord, we begin to bear much fruit, end quote. Bearing that in mind, the Pope stressed that, quote, the heroism that the world needs from you today can only be sustainable if you have strong roots, end quote. Economic conversion will be possible when we experience conversion of the heart, he added, as then we will be able to, quote, reverse the prejudicial actions that are preparing a bleak future for future generations, end quote. Last portion he has here is do everything with love. The third and final thought concerns work and poverty, says the Pope. Upholding St. Francis of Assisi as an example, after whom he is named, Pope Francis reminded those present that all he did was done with love, and he felt for the poor, and with and with his austere way of life, which is hilarious because he lives in like the biggest palace in Europe. But anyways, quote, with the value of work and poverty, which imply a complete trust in God and not in things, an economy can be created that reconciles the members of the different stages of production without them despising each other, without creating more injustice or experiencing cold indifference, end quote, explained the Pope. On the other hand, he stressed, quote, this does not mean that you love extreme poverty, which on the contrary must be combated. And to this end, you have good tools, such as the possibility of creating jobs and thus contributing to giving dignity to your neighbor, end quote. Create an economy at the service of each human being. Bringing his discourse to a close, Pope Francis encouraged the entrepreneurs to present, encouraged the entrepreneurs present to continue to quote, continue to creatively transform the face of the economy so that it may be more attentive to ethical principle, end quote, as well as to, quote, not forget that its activity is at the service of the human being, not just of the few, but of all, especially the poor, end quote. Finally, the, quote, Holy Father entrusted all those present to the protection of the Blessed Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph. By the way, when people sit there and they'll say stuff like, oh, we don't worship the Pope, the Holy Father entrusted all those present to the protection of Blessed Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph. What do you call giving people over to the divine protection of individuals? I would call that worship. But what do I know? I'm just a Protestant. Anyway, who took care of their family and the home with a parental heart. And there is the end of the article. Very short article. But the point of this is to say, and we all already know this because we listen to Democrats in our own country, and a lot of you guys who watch this show also even listen to, different globalists from other countries and United Nations officials and stuff like that. Please excuse my yawning there. The point of reading this article was just to demonstrate that Pope Francis is now throwing his holy authority, quote unquote. I, of course, don't actually believe he has any holy authority, but the world does, is throwing his, quote, holy authority behind the ideas of the Great Reset. He's not explicitly stating them because Pope Francis is smarter than that. But we all know what transformation of the economy for the common good actually means, especially considering, he has already in the past expressed that he is, that he has socialistic leanings. He's expressed that he has been influenced by liberation theology. In fact, he actually once had a little treatise. I'm trying to remember what the name of it was. Let me go ahead and look it up here. I think it's Fratelli Tutti. It might be. Let me see. Socialist work. I cannot remember what it was called. Amoris Laetitia. Yes, Amoris Laetitia. Where he basically just expressed outright socialistic ideals. So, we know what these dog whistles mean coming from Pope Francis is my point. And this is just to demonstrate to you guys that indeed Pope Francis is exactly who we all have thought him to be. He is throwing, like I said, his, quote, holy authority behind the exact same agenda that is being pushed forward by Klaus Schwab and others there in the World Economic Forum. But nonetheless, we are now going to get to our headliner, friends, and that is a pagan for the first time ever in the history of the nation as we know it today. In fact, in the history of England total, a pagan now rules in Britain. This is exactly correct, my friends. A pagan now rules in Britain. He is a Hindu. His name is Rishi Sunak, and we are going to read a little bit about him today. Now, I would like to be clear before I get into this. I believe in religious liberty. And as somebody who believes in religious liberty, I believe that Rishi Sunak should have the right to worship his various gods as he sees fit. That is between him and the Lord, and the Lord will rebuke him at some point, whether it be in this life or the next. It is not my place to demand of him, although, of course, it would be my place to try and convert him, right? Obviously, we have the Great Commission. However, I believe it is, shall we say, a symptom of a fallen nation, a judgment, if you will, against Britain, that their current prime minister is a blatant pagan. And their previous prime minister ruled for a grand total of 50 days before having to resign because of financial crisis. And the prime minister before that, Boris Johnson, on top of just being an absolute stooge, was also somebody who was blatantly immoral, was a drug addict, was frequently divorced, had a child with his mistress while prime minister. The point is, the government of Britain is incredibly immoral, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And all of the previous three prime ministers have been members of the Tory party, which is their conservative party, their equivalent of our Republicans, which means this is actually the better of the two sides. And you get guys like Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. This is the state of the world, and it is a dangerous, and it is a deadly, and it is a fatal to the nation state of the world. I am sorry if people don't believe that kind of stuff. I'm sorry if you think that I am being somehow bigoted or prejudiced. But I am a firm believer that this is a symptom of a deadly cancer that is currently present in the nation of Great Britain. And that deadly cancer is godlessness. That deadly cancer is a complete and total abject rejection of the God of Scripture, who is the one true God. And, friends, coming soon to a video store near you, as they used to say. In other words, the United States is right around the corner. When our Republican Party is supposed to be the good party, and is throwing its weight behind Donald Trump, who, of course, was divorced twice and married a third time, cheated on all three of his wives, was a owner of strip clubs and gambling malls and stuff like that, and was literally not a conservative in any way, shape, or form to boot, being a supporter of the United Nations, being a supporter of anti-gun legislation, being somebody who pushed forward a whole bunch of bills during the COVID-19 pandemic that ended up leading to the gross inflation that we currently have today. It was not just Biden's fault. Biden had to do with it, certainly, but it was absolutely Trump's fault as well. If you don't believe that, I got a bridge to sell you, my friend. When we throw our weight behind Caitlyn Jenner, formerly known as Bruce Jenner, transgender, a man who's pretending to be a woman, when we throw our weight behind Kanye West, who is, on top of being flagrantly anti-Semitic, on top of being basically out of his mind, is also somebody who's decided, hey, I want to have a whole bunch of naked girls dancing all over my music videos, and I want to endorse blatantly drug use and alcohol use and all this other kind of stuff. When we start throwing our weight behind Herschel Walker in the current Georgia senatorial race, a man who has, while simultaneously saying that we have a fatherlessness problem in the black community, has 4 children, 3 of which he refuses to acknowledge up until the media forced him to. He's paid for the abortions of his mistresses, has beaten up his wives in the past. When we decide to throw our weight behind these people, we're going to get Joe Biden's. And eventually, Joe Biden's turn into Bernie Sanders. And eventually, Bernie Sanders turn into Rishi Sunak's. This is the trajectory down which we are going. There is simply no doubt about it. And Britain is just a little bit ahead in the future. If you ever want to see where America is going, pay attention to Europe. Because everything that happens in Europe eventually comes to the United States a decade later. That's just the way it is. In fact, I have a good friend, Nicholas Whitmer, who many of you guys may know, Proclaimer of Messiah, has a YouTube channel on here. You should totally check it out. He's been on here, actually, on this channel to discuss the best way to fight the war on babies, which, of course, we fight for the babies, not against them. But at any rate, and he once said that and I thought it was brilliant, that the Republican Party is just running a little behind on the flight carrying the bags of the Democrats. And I'd like to take that a little bit further for our purposes today. The American people are just running a little bit behind carrying the bags of the Europeans. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Mark my words, we will get there. The first atheist, the first pagan, the first flagrant socialist to be elected president of the United States is right around the corner. Maybe not even in the 2030s. It might be the next president of the United States. Anyways, let's go to the Wikipedia page of Rishi Sunak and read a little bit about this man, shall we? Excuse me, I'm going to get a drink of my coffee here. I've got a bunch of stuff in my throat here. So, let's read a little bit about this gentleman, shall we? First, we will simply read this beginning portion right here, right? The little generalization that Wikipedia has. Rishi Sunak is a British politician who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom since October the 25th, 2022, and as leader of the Conservative Party since October the 24th, 2022. Excuse me. Sunak served as Chancellor of the I don't know how to say this, I'm sorry, Exchequer from 2020 to 2022, and Secretary of the Treasury, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, from 2019 to 2020, and has been a member of Parliament for Richmond or Yorks since 2015. Sunak was born in Southampton to parents of Indian descent who migrated to Britain from East Africa in the 1960s. He was educated at Winchester College, studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Lincoln College, Oxford, and earned an MBA from Stanford University, which is here in the United States, as a Fulbright scholar. While at Stanford, he met his future wife, Akshanta Murthy. Probably said that incorrectly, but my apologies. The daughter of Indian billionaire N.R. Narayana Murthy of Infosys. After graduating, Sunak worked for Goldman Sachs and later as a partner at the hedge fund firms, the Children Investment Fund Management, and Thelem Partners. By the way, Goldman Sachs is seemingly always linked to really weird and bizarre stuff, including our own Federal Reserve, but we'll get into that in another episode. Sunak was elected to the House of Commons for Richmond and North Yorkshire at the 2015 general election, succeeding William Hogg. Sunak supported Brexit in the 2016 referendum on EU membership. He was appointed to Theresa May's second government as Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Local Government in the 2018 reshuffle. He voted 3 times in favor of May's Brexit withdrawal agreement after May resigned. Sunak supported Boris Johnson's campaign to become Conservative leader. After Johnson became Prime Minister, Sunak was appointed Chief Secretary of the Treasury. Sunak replaced Sajid Javid as Chancellor of the Exchequer. I don't know how to say that word, I'm sorry. After Javid's resignation in the February 2020 cabinet reshuffle. As Chancellor, Sunak was prominent in the government's financial response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic impact, including the coronavirus job retention and Eat Out to Help Out schemes. He resigned as Chancellor in July 2022, followed by Johnson's resignation amid a governmental crisis. Sunak stood in the Conservative Party leadership election to replace Johnson and lost the members' vote to Liz Truss. Truss is the person who was there for a grand total of 50 days, by the way, before ended up leaving because of crisis. After Truss' resignation amid a credibility crisis, Sunak was elected unopposed as leader of the Conservative Party. He was appointed Prime Minister by King Charles III the first to be appointed during the reign of King Charles III on October 25th, 2022, becoming the first British Asian, first Hindu, that's that pagan thing we're concerned about, and non-white person to hold that position. Now, of course, I have no problem with an Asian having control of the parliament there. I have no problem with a non-white person having control of the parliament there. And I do believe we should live in a country where people who worship, in the Hindu religion are religiously free, right? So it's not like I think there should be laws against him being the leader. What it is, and maybe I'm even naive on that. Maybe somebody could let me know. But what it is I think we should have a culture, and in this case, Britain should have a culture that doesn't want to elect a pagan, that doesn't want to elect somebody before him who's going to have a credibility crisis, or somebody before her who's going to actually be having children out of wedlock with his mistress in the middle of his prime ministership. We should want a culture that doesn't approve of these things. It doesn't mean that these people should have their freedoms taken away. Think of the N-word as a good example. Should the N-word be illegal? No, of course it shouldn't. That's ridiculous. We shouldn't be policing speech. Should we live in a culture where people don't desire to call black people Ners? Obviously we should, right? So those are separated things, and I want to make that perfectly clear because I think a lot of people think that we want people of non-Protestant Christian faith to be persecuted or to not have rights. That is not the case. I want them to have just as many rights as I do. But I do want to live in a culture that doesn't trust them to lead the country. I'm going to be perfectly frank about that. I want to live in a culture that does not trust them to lead the country. Why? Because they're pagans. Because they're pagans. Because they deny the one true God who gives them the liberty that I want them to have. Again, I'm sorry if that's bigoted. It's the way I feel, and I think it's the truth. So let's look at a couple of the things that he has done. First, we'll go to some of the stuff he did as chancellor. This is his portion on the COVID-19 pandemic. Sunak's first budget took place on March 11th, 2020. This included 30 billion pounds of additional spending, of which 12 billion pounds is their equivalent of a dollar, for those who don't know, was allocated for mitigation of the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. As the pandemic generated financial consequences, Chancellor Sunak's measures received criticism as some workers were unable to qualify for the Treasury's income support measures. The acting leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, said that people were being unfairly hung out to dry with their dream jobs turning into nightmares after hundreds of MPs contacted the Chancellor. The Institute for Employment Studies estimated that 100,000 people could not be eligible for any type of government help as they started a new job too late to be included on the job retention scheme. While the British Hospitality Association informed Treasury Select Committee that between 350,000 and 500,000 workers in the sector were not eligible. Sunak was part of a committee of cabinet ministers, also compromising Boris Johnson, that is, Matt Hancock, and Michael Gove, that made decisions on the pandemic. Sunak received a fixed penalty notice alongside Johnson for attending a party, but he did not deliver a statement or resign. So he's one of those people who, for you, but not for me. Rules for thee, not for me kind of guy, right? Because, of course, he is. Moving forward to some of his political positions, a lot of this stuff is, I think you guys should read this whole Wikipedia article here, but nonetheless, I do obviously want to get to some of this more important stuff. This is just what he's recently accomplished in his 1 week so far as Prime Minister of the UK. Sunak was appointed Prime Minister of the United Kingdom by King Charles III on October 25th, 2022, making him the first British Asian Prime Minister and the first Hindu to hold the office. His cabinet, Sunak began appointing his cabinet on October the 25th, 2022. He appointed Dominic Raab and as Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary of State for Justice, and Lord Chancellor. Sunak reappointed Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor of the Exchequer, however you say that word, I'm sorry. James Cleverly as Foreign Secretary, and Ben Wallace as Secretary for State Defense. He also appointed Nadim Zahawi as chairman of the Conservative Party. Sunak controversially appointed Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. Labor and Liberal Democrats have demanded an inquiry into Braverman's return to the cabinet despite an alleged security breach when Braverman shared secure information with a colleague. Environment. In a reversal of his predecessor's policy, on October 26, Sunak reinstated the ban on fracking, as outlined in the 2019 Conservative Manifesto. Yes, he is one of those banned fracking people. In October, Sunak said that he would not attend the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP27, in Egypt as Prime Minister, which I believe is happening this November. Hang on just a sec. I want to figure out when this is. Yes, November 6th to 18th. So just right around the corner. We will be covering that, by the way, Lord willing. Back to what we were talking about. Critics suggest the non-attendance shows a failure of leadership. Labour Party leader Keir Starmer, Liberal Democratic leader Ed Davey, Green Party MP Caroline Lucas, and environmentalist Rebecca Newsom of Greenpeace said they feared the government did not take the climate crisis sufficiently seriously, even though, of course, he's banning fracking and stuff like that, and we'll get to some other stuff in a moment. Conservative MP Nadine Dorries said that the Prime Minister is wrong not to go, and Sunak's president for COP26, Alok Sharma, said that he was disappointed over the non-attendance. Carlos Fuller, Belize's ambassador to the United Nations, said that Sunak should be attending, while Mohamed Nasheed, the Speaker of the Maldives Parliament and former president, felt climate change was more pressing than other problems that the UK has, and that the UK has its priorities wrong. Climate change in the Maldives means that by 2050, 80% of the country could become uninhabitable due to sea level rise. At least that's what they say. Obviously, we're just reading the Wikipedia article here and taking, not really taking its word for it, because I don't really believe the whole climate change thing, to be honest with you, but I digress. That's obviously what they say. Political positions. According to Euronews, Sunak is frequently perceived as a pragmatist, excuse me, and as belonging to the center ground of the Conservative Party. He opposed the fiscal policies of his predecessor, Liz Truss, and although described as a fellow Thatcherite, is viewed as less economically libertarian than Truss. Sunak supports Ukraine against the Russian invasion of the country, and supports economic sanctions against Russia, but opposes British military intervention in Ukraine. As British Chancellor, Sunak opposed U.S. President Joe Biden's plan to introduce a minimum 21% global business tax in August 2022, which, to be fair, good on Sunak there. In August 2022, he proposed widening the prevent strategy by widening the definition of extremism. Let's go ahead and read that for a moment, because that is an incredibly disheartening thing. This is from The Guardian. Former counterterrorism police chief attacks Rishi Sunak's prevent plans. Peter Fahey critical of proposal to widen definition of extremism and include people who vilify Britain. We're going to read this article and then return back to what we were reading. Rishi Sunak's proposal to strengthen the government's anti-terrorism program risks straying into thought crimes and are potentially damaging to national security, a former senior police chief has said. The former chancellor announced measures to beef up the Prevent program on Tuesday night as part of a bid to boost his flagging campaign to succeed Boris Johnson as the next prime minister. These would lead to more people being referred to Prevent by widening the definition of extremism to include those who vilify Britain, with Sunak pledging to focus on rooting out those who are vocal in their hatred of our country. So, literally not only going into thought crime, but also going into a very dangerous attack on people's ability to have freedom of speech. Because let's recall, some of the people who quote unquote vilify Britain would be people like Tommy Robinson, who is a English nationalist and believes that the British government does not do enough to fight against Islamic grooming gangs, which are patrolling the streets of not only his native city, which is it's fleeting me at the moment. I can't remember the name, but it'll come to me in just a second. But also, London, Birmingham, Oxford, etc. These are the kinds of people who quote unquote vilify Britain, right? Now, what about people like Anjem Chowdhury. I believe Anjem Chowdhury should have the right to say what he wants to say. He's a Islamic fundamentalist, by the way. But it probably won't include him. It'll probably include your Nigel Farages, founder of UKIP, your Tommy Robinsons, founder of the English Defence League, potentially people in the Scottish Nationalist Party, right? These are the kinds of people who, quote unquote, vilify Britain and who would therefore be subject to being watched under the Prevent program and potentially even being arrested as well. So this guy is basically wanting to expand the already ridiculously sized police state that you have in Great Britain. Former counterterrorism chief Sir Peter Fahey, who was also chief constable of Greater Manchester Police, questioned the precise Luton. Sorry, hang on really quick. Luton is the city that I was thinking of where Tommy Robinson is from. Anyways, questioned the precise meaning of vilification. He said, quote, "The widening of Prevent could damage its credibility and reputation. It makes it more about people's thoughts and opinions. It is straying into thought crimes and political opinions," which is exactly right. He added, "Political opposition is not where police should be. It is those who pose a serious threat and risk of violence, not those opposed to political systems," end quote. Sunak said on Tuesday night that, quote, Britain is a beacon of freedom, tolerance, and diversity, which is hilarious, by the way. I don't know what world he's living in. But at any rate, warning against ever letting those who seek to undermine and destroy our way of life succeed. He said he would, He said he would refocus the Prevent program to tackle Islamist extremism, which I actually don't even think that that's a problem, but it's the way he's going about it that I think is a problem. He said that he would refocus the Prevent program to tackle Islamist extremism that he called the UK's most significant terror threat. That is true. He also promised to, quote, weed out and cut off organizations that are promoting extremism in the UK, and added there is no more important duty for a prime minister than keeping our country and our people safe, end quote. Which, again, agree with the words. I don't agree with what's behind the words. Extremism is defined in the 2011 Prevent strategy as vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs, as well as the calls for the death of armed forces personnel. Excuse me. Sunak's team vowed to broaden that out to include vilification of the UK to ensure those with an extreme hatred of our country that leads them to pose a risk to national security can be identified and diverted away from a destructive path. They stressed it was not a legally binding definition, and simply criticizing the government of any of its policies would not count as vilification, but instead help guide the public sector in its work to keep the UK safe. Prevent previously ran into controversy over whether it should cover those criticizing UK foreign policy and British conduct in the 2003 Iraq War. In recent years, the police side of Prevent has tried to focus much more on those at risk of falling into terrorist violence. Those in the public sector are under a duty to report concerns to Prevent, which has previously concerned consternation. Their information is the lifeblood of the counter-radicalization scheme, which has been dogged by claims it has strayed into suppressing freedom of thought and speech, which is absolutely the case. Look up Tommy Robinson if you don't believe me. The man was literally a political prisoner. Fahey said, quote, "The danger is the perception it creates that teachers and health workers are involved in state surveillance. What does vilification mean? Vilification would have to be carefully defined," end quote. Former counterterrorism chief Neil Basu said that Prevent was the most important strand of the UK's battle about violent extremism. A review of the program ordered by the government has been delivered to officials, but there is no public timetable for its publication. Sunak's pledges to improve security include blocking terrorists from trying to abuse our human rights framework by classifying them differently from the general prison population via a new Bill of Rights, auditing publicly funded third-party organizations to ensure no extremist group gets taxpayer cash, and funneling off those preferred to Prevent who are more in need of mental health support. Quote, "Whether redoubling our efforts to tackle Islamic extremism or rooting out those who are vocal in their hatred of our country, I will do whatever it takes to fulfill that duty," end quote. And again, I have no problem with fighting against the rampant Islamic extremism problem they have in Britain. And it is rampant, but you need to go about it in a way that does not violate the freedoms of people in Britain, such as your Tommy Robinsons, such as your Paul Joseph Watsons, such as your Count Dankulas or Sargon of Akkad's or Nigel Farage and UKIP and so on and so forth. The expanding of this to say people who, quote, vilify the British government, and he may not even mean it this way. He may not mean to arrest people like those I just mentioned, but somebody is going to use this at some point in time to arrest those kinds of people. And by the way, this is exactly what happened in the United States, is it not, with the USA Patriot Act? The USA Patriot Act was meant to fight against Islamic terrorists, and it ended up being used against people who believe you should homeschool your children, people who believe that we have a right to bear arms, people who believe that abortion is the national sin, so on and so forth. So it's not like this is conspiracy theory for us to be concerned with this, right? They say it's going to be used against one group of people who we should be reasonably concerned with, but they inevitably end up going against another group of people who we should not be concerned with, who are in fact just using their liberties to criticize the government, and sometimes even criticize the government in a important and fundamental to liberty kind of way. Anyways, back to the Wikipedia article. On crime, Sunak proposed an automatic 1-year extension to prison sentences for prolific criminals, as well as cutting the minimum sentence before a foreign criminal is eligible for deportation from 12 months to 6. He proposed life imprisonment for leaders of child grooming gangs. Totally on board with that. And for police to record the ethnicity of those involved in such gangs. Totally on board with that also. So not everything Sunak does is wrong, for the record. I am objective here. Energy and the environment. Sunak has signed the Conservative Environmental Pledge, as shown as on the Conservative Environmental Network website, which has the support of approximately 127 members of Parliament. The CEP has 5 main commitments, which are in summary: using Brexit freedoms for the environment and sustainable farming, backing British clean energy suppliers so as to boost energy security, encouraging the use of domestic insulation and electric vehicle charging points, implementing the Environment Act, backing technology that will help to achieve clean growth. During the leadership contest held over summer 2022, Sunak told the CEN that he was engaged with the protection of the environment for future generations. Sunak has said he is committed to keeping the legal commitment to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. During the summer, he said that he intended to make the UK energy independent by 2045. The first of those, not good. The second of those, very good. What I mean is, net zero carbon emissions is a ridiculous peacenik kind of thing that is, I think, absurd, but energy independence, totally down with. Anyways, while advocating for more offshore wind power, more solar plants on rooftops, and improved insulation of homes to make them more energy efficient, Simon Hoare, MP of North Devon, said that Sunak recognizes the need for the government to be a government with its focus on the environment, delivering sustainable growth. Sunak is said to have listened to fellow MPs with a green agenda and that he was a believer in net zero for the UK. However, Sunak also voted against a bill that called for Britain to eliminate most greenhouse gas emissions from transportation by 2030. He would rather push that off to 2050. So let's just be clear here. It's not that he's against it. It's just that he's against that timetable. While campaigning in August 2022, Sunak wrote in the Daily Telegraph that he would restrict the use of solar panels on farmland, but would make sure solar is installed on commercial buildings, properties, and sheds. Quote, "On my watch, we will not lose swaths of our best farmland to solar farms," end quote. The trade association, which is not a bad idea there. Again, we are going to be objective here. The trade association Solar Energy UK said the solar industry was deeply concerned with candidate Sunak and Truss intentions. At the moment, solar panels cover less than 0.1% of UK's land. With solar, while solar is the world's cheapest energy, though it does have a very poor caloric outtake, which means the amount of energy it actually produces, which could improve as technology improves, for the record. I'm not against green energy. I'm just simply against the government forcing green energy on people if it's not yet calorically sustainable. Sunak has backed fracking, even though he recently banned fracking. Or maybe that was a this is a Wikipedia article, so maybe that was actually a mistyping or whatever up there earlier where it said he had banned fracking. On October 19th, in the debate on, I'll look that up on a better source and give you guys an update this Thursday. On October 19th, in a debate on ban fracking for shale gas bill, he voted with the government against the ban on fracking. Fracking has been banned by the government, had been banned by the government in November 2019 after a report by the Oil and Gas Authority found it was not possible at that time to predict the probability or strength of earthquakes caused by fracking. While Chancellor Sunak attended COP26 in Glasgow, we're going to skip through a bunch of this because I am very short on time. I'm sorry. LGBT rights. On LGBT rights in July 2022, during a debate, Sunak said he wanted the UK to be the safest and greatest country in the world for LGBT+. When asked about alleged or perceived transphobia within the party, he stated that the prejudice against trans people is wrong. The Conservative Party is an open, welcoming family to everybody across society, no matter who they are and irrespective of their background. Sunak believes that transgender people should be respected, but said he views biology as important and fundamental regarding bathrooms and competitive sports. So he's kind of wishy-washy on that issue. Immigration. Sunak has expressed support for lowering net migration. An official spokesperson said he's committed to ensuring we have control over our borders and that the public rightly expects us to control immigration and have a system that works best for the UK. He has said that the current asylum system is broken and needs to be fixed urgently, saying he would, in the first 100 days as Prime Minister, tighten our statutory definitions of who qualifies for asylum in the UK. This will prevent anyone who enters the UK illegally from staying here, and that the Parliament will be given control of the number of refugees we accept each year, that he cannot underestimate the role of data sharing, which will make it easier to identify people who are in the UK illegally, and that the Rwanda asylum plan is the right one, among other things. Responding to criticism surrounding some of his proposals about illegal immigration, Sunak said there was absolutely nothing racist about it, which, for the record, is of course true, because he himself is a Hindu. Anyways, friends, that's our show today. So, in recap, the Pope is blatantly backing Gutierrez's UN with Teeth plan, and is also blatantly backing the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. A pagan currently rules in Britain, and the Pontifical Academy for Life has officially become basically null and void. With all that being said, friends, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please consider liking and sharing this video, as well as subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. We try to go live every Tuesday and Thursday, though I am absolutely awful at it. Lord willing, we will be here again soon. If you support us, please do consider supporting us on Gab, Parler, Minds, Facebook, or Twitter, going to the synagogue and giving us a follow there. Also consider sharing this video. Also, you can give to us financially, either through the Patreon, where you can give as much or as little as you like monthly, or the PayPal, where you can give as much or as little as you like one time. Also, remember to leave any questions, comments, criticisms, or concerns in the comment section down below, friends. And with all that being said, I appreciate every single one of you. We are out of here. If the Lord wills and tarries, we'll be seeing you here soon. And I want to ask you guys the question. First off, remember to think like Neanderthals. And secondly, in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise? Shalom, friends.